When my stepsister and my fiancé found out that my bonus was bigger than theirs, he snorted, "You? Worth more than us? Please." They conspired to get me fired. 7 hours later, the CFO offered me their jobs. "Because you actually do the work." I knew things were tense the moment I mentioned the size of my bonus. It was a stupid moment of honesty. One of those conversations where people start joking about work bonuses and suddenly there's pressure to share numbers. I should have just said something vague. But I didn't. I said the truth, $42,000. I said it casually, just like people talk about a nice weather day or a good concert. What I didn't expect was the look on Bennett's face. My fiancé at the time blinked, smirked, and gave a little half-laugh, almost like he was choking on his drink. "You? Worth more than us? Please." The air in the room changed. It was thick, uncomfortable. Serafina, my stepsister, didn't even try to hide the way her eyes narrowed. That was the first real warning. It wasn't like they ever celebrated my work achievements, but I never expected that kind of venom. I thought they'd tease me, maybe roll their eyes. But I underestimated how insecure some people can be when the quiet one wins. After that, little things started happening. Bennett started working late. Serafina started texting him more, calling him for family stuff. He grew distant. She grew nosier, asking weird questions about our company's internal tools, HR practices, platforms we used. I thought maybe she was job hunting. What I didn't know is that she and Bennett were plotting to make me look like a security risk. They wanted me out. Fired. Ruined. All because I made more money than they did for doing what I was actually good at. I remember the moment it all started to unravel. It was a Wednesday, early January. The cold had that Boston sting to it, the kind that makes your bones ache. I came into the office like I always did, coffee in hand, to find my badge no longer worked. That had never happened before. Even during system updates or tech hiccups, we had backup access. But this time, my account was deactivated. My email? Gone. I stood at the front desk like someone who didn't belong there. By noon, I was in a sterile HR conference room with a woman I barely knew explaining there had been a report anonymously, of course, of suspicious file access from my credentials. I was stunned. I couldn't even form words. I hadn't touched anything outside of my assignments. They told me it could be an error. Protocol. But I was put on leave. They said they'd be in touch soon. I drove home shaking. I hadn't felt that powerless in years. And the worst part? I knew in my gut that it had something to do with Bennett and Serafina. But at that point, it was just a feeling. I had nothing concrete. Until later that night. Bennett came home late. I was sitting on the couch, curled under a blanket with the TV playing background noise I wasn't watching. He barely looked at me. Said something vague about a meeting running long. His coat still smelled like Serafina's perfume. That vanilla and pepper scent she always doused herself in. It turned my stomach. He dropped his tablet on the shelf like he always did. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got a text. From a number I didn't recognize. Check his tablet. Trust your instincts. No punctuation. Just that. I should have been scared. Maybe I was. But fear has a funny way of turning into adrenaline. I picked up the tablet and tried his usual passcode, the one he used for everything. His old football number. It opened on the first try. There they were. Emails. Dozens of them. Not just casual messages, but cold, strategic ones. From him to Serafina. Back and forth. Discussing my schedule. Internal systems. Ways to trigger a security flag under my login. Talking about me like I was a problem to be removed. One message still sticks in my mind. Serafina had written, "Once she's out, you'll finally be free to grow. We're the real power couple, Bennett." Not you and her. She's background noise. And he'd responded, I'm sick of pretending. Let's make it happen fast. My chest hurt reading it. Not just from betrayal, but from how deliberate it all was. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a campaign. I screenshotted everything. Every message. Every calendar detail. Every login. I backed it up in 2 different cloud drives. I emailed it to a trusted friend. I called someone I knew in law. I couldn't sleep that night. By morning, I was back on the phone with HR. This time, I brought receipts. The HR rep I spoke with wasn't the same woman from the previous day. This one had the voice of someone who'd been dealing with corporate messes for 2 decades and was tired of the routine but too professional to let it show. I have some documentation that proves the security breach didn't come from me, I told her. In fact, I think you'll find the actual culprits were trying to use my account as a cover. Her tone changed instantly. Within an hour, I was in a secure virtual meeting with not just HR, but also someone from the internal compliance team. They reviewed the files I sent. I watched their faces go from skeptical to still. One woman muted herself, probably cursing under her breath. Another kept reading and rereading the same email chain, her eyes wide. They said they needed a few hours to verify everything. That's when I knew I wasn't crazy. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't an overreaction. Bennett and Serafina had really done this. And I had them in writing. Around 4:30 p.m., I got another call. This time, it was from Jacqueline Belrose, the company's CFO. I'd only ever seen her at town halls and quarterly briefings. She was a woman of few words and intense presence, someone who didn't bother with small talk or sugarcoating. Margot, she said. Can you come in? Tonight. There was no please. No explanation. Just that. I said yes. When I walked into the boardroom on the 31st floor, the skyline was lit up in icy January blue. Jacqueline sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She didn't invite me to sit. She didn't even ask how I was. Instead, she slid a thick folder across the table. This is what your fiancé and stepsister tried to do. Inside the folder were security logs, internal reports, annotated screenshots, a full audit trail of what Bennett and Serafina had accessed, what they'd planted, and how they manipulated timestamps to make it appear like I had violated company protocols. You weren't the only person they'd tried to undermine, Jacqueline added, folding her arms. But this was the boldest attempt yet. What they did could have sunk you. It could have cost us millions if we hadn't caught it. I stood there, unsure what she wanted from me. Was I being thanked? Pitted? Warned? Then she said, without blinking, they'd both been terminated. Effective immediately. My throat tightened, but I didn't say anything. She wasn't done. We've been looking for someone to replace Bennett anyway. He was all style, no substance. And we need a head for the strategic analysis group. You've been doing the work unofficially for a year now. Might as well make it official. I finally spoke. Why me? Jacqueline cracked the faintest smile, barely there, but real. Because you actually do the work. I didn't drive home. I just sat in my car in the garage for a long time, the heater humming softly while I stared at the steering wheel. It wasn't just about the job. It was the unraveling of 2 relationships at once. My fiancé. My family. I was supposed to be planning a wedding. Sunday brunch. Niece and nephew birthdays. I should have been discussing flower arrangements and honeymoon flights, not watching people I trusted try to destroy everything I'd worked for. But at the same time, it felt like air had returned to my lungs. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I'd been right to follow my gut. And now, they were the ones on the outside looking in. That night, I didn't wait for Bennett to come home. I was already packing. I started with the essential documents, clothes, and a few valuables that were mine alone. Everything else could be sorted later. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want one more excuse, or gaslight, or desperate attempt to spin things in his favor. But I didn't get my wish. He came home around 9:30 p.m., coat half-buttoned, looking exhausted. His tie was loose, and he was carrying takeout like he was trying to play normal one last time. The moment he saw the packed suitcase, he froze. "What the heck is this?" I didn't stop folding. "You've been fired," I said quietly. "Serafina too. I know everything." He tried to speak. Paused. Opened his mouth again. "Margot, just let me explain." I turned to him, holding up my phone. "I have your emails, Bennett. All of them. Every disgusting word." His face was drained of color. "I didn't mean you meant every bit of it. You didn't slip up. You planned it. You tried to frame me." His voice cracked. "It wasn't like that. She was in my ear all the time, telling me we deserved more, that you were holding me back. She was jealous. And you were weak." That stopped him. He didn't deny it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just zipped up the suitcase and walked out. I didn't even look back. I spent that night at a friend's place. Someone who didn't ask questions just gave me a glass of wine and a quiet place to breathe. The next morning, the world looked different. Not brighter yet. Just quieter. I woke up in my friend Naomi's guest bedroom, the kind with yellow walls and a crooked lamp, still half-packed with boxes from her last move. It was unfamiliar, but it was safe. I hadn't looked at my phone all night, but when I did, I had 10 missed calls from Bennett. 4 texts. 2 voicemails. All of them sounded increasingly desperate, but none of them took responsibility. They were full of deflections. I didn't think it would go that far. Serafina was the one who pushed it. I just went along. "Can we just talk?" The answer to all of them was no. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things don't require closure, just distance. That day, I went into the office. Not as someone on leave. Not as someone begging for her job back. I went in as a newly minted director with an official title and her own office, freshly vacated by the man who'd once mocked the very idea of me being worth more. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. People avoided eye contact at first. Whispers floated between cubicles, especially in Bennett's old department. But word travels fast in corporate buildings, especially when it comes to drama. By the end of the week, the story was out in full. Not all the ugly details, of course. Just enough for people to know that someone had tried to torpedo me and got caught. I wasn't smug. I was tired. But underneath that exhaustion, I felt something else creeping in: clarity. Later that week, I got a call from my mother. She'd heard everything, not from me, but through Philip. Apparently, Serafina had come crying to him, spinning some vague tale about corporate politics and jealous women at the top. But Philip wasn't buying it. Not after seeing the evidence I'd shared with legal. Not after speaking directly with Jacqueline, who didn't sugarcoat a single fact when he called to clear things up. "Why didn't you tell me?" my mother asked, her voice low, almost hurt. "I didn't want to pull you into it," I replied. And honestly, I didn't know how bad it was until it all exploded. There was a pause. A long one. "I'm so sorry, Margot. I thought she was just immature. Not dangerous." I didn't say anything to that. There was nothing left to say. Serafina was out of work. Blacklisted, from what I'd heard through back channels. Apparently, someone she had once burned in another marketing job had finally gotten their revenge by ensuring no one would touch her resume in Boston, at least not at the level she wanted. I didn't gloat. But I didn't feel bad either. She had aimed low and dirty. She had underestimated me. Now she had time to reflect on all of it. That was her prize. Back at work, I poured myself into the new role. There was something deeply healing about starting meetings, leading strategy sessions, Walking into conference rooms where I used to be the one in the background and realizing that now I was the voice people waited for. I didn't change overnight. I still preferred data to drama, clarity over chaos. But something in me had shifted. I didn't shrink anymore. I didn't apologize for being good at what I did. And people noticed. Jacqueline became a quiet mentor. She wasn't warm, but she respected competence. Every time she asked me to present to the board, I felt the weight of what that meant. One afternoon, during a quarterly business review, she leaned in before we started and said, "Bennett would have flopped halfway through this deck." I laughed for the first time in weeks. As for Bennett? He moved out of the apartment a week after I left. Sent me one last email, a pathetic mix of apology and excuse, something about never meaning to hurt me and getting swept up in the wrong narrative. I archived it without replying. I didn't need his words anymore. His actions had said enough. A few months passed. I found a new place in Cambridge, smaller, older, but full of charm. Hardwood floors, squeaky pipes, and a window that overlooked a bookstore I'd always loved but never had time to visit. Now I did. I went on Sundays. I started buying physical books again. I took up running. Not the kind for medals or training apps. Just early morning jogs around the Charles River, breathing in the cold and letting my thoughts settle. Naomi said I seemed lighter. That I stood straighter. That I had a spark again. I told her I just felt clear. Like I'd walked through fire and came out without smoke in my lungs. It was early spring when Serafina finally reached out. The message came through LinkedIn of all places, short, clipped, and almost formal. "Margot, I know you're probably still angry, but I'd like to talk. There are things you don't know." She wasn't wrong. I was angry. But I wasn't curious. Not anymore. Still, I let the message sit in my inbox for a few days before deleting it without a response. Because here's the thing about people like Serafina, they don't apologize. They circle. They shift blame. They wait for your emotions to soften and then swoop in with a new version of the story where they're the victim, and you're cold-hearted for not forgiving them. But I had learned something important. Forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back in. Sometimes it's just letting go of the version of yourself who tolerated their behavior in the first place. I didn't want to be in the same room, virtual or otherwise, with someone who once referred to me as dead weight. A month later, I received an invitation to speak on a career panel hosted by one of Boston's top women in tech organizations. The theme was resilience and reinvention in high-stakes careers. I didn't hesitate. The panel was held in a glass-walled event space overlooking the harbor. I wore a slate blue blazer and didn't bring notes. Just a story. I talked about trusting your instincts. About staying quiet when necessary, but never invisible. About the difference between working hard and being taken for granted. I didn't name names. I didn't drag anyone publicly. But when I spoke about betrayal, there were nods in the room. People felt it. And when I talked about what it means to reclaim your career, your sense of self, your peace, they clapped harder than I expected. After the event, a young woman probably fresh out of grad school approached me. "How did you stay so calm?" she asked. "When you realized people you trusted were trying to take you down?" I didn't give her a long answer. I stopped trusting them. And I started trusting myself. I haven't seen Bennett since last night. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he left Boston about starting over in Chicago. I hope he finds what he's looking for, or at least realizes what he lost. Serafina? She's still in town, or so I've been told. Her name occasionally pops up on smaller project pitches or niche marketing campaigns. But never at the level she used to brag about. Our paths don't cross. They won't. Nowadays, my life is calm. Satisfying in a quiet, ordinary way. I don't look over my shoulder. I don't dread Mondays. I spend my mornings with strong coffee and my evenings reading in bed. My team respects me not out of fear, but because I respect them back. I mentor two women who remind me of myself 10 years ago, hardworking, humble, overlooked. They won't stay overlooked for long. Sometimes, when I walk by the old building where it all happened, where Bennett and Serafina schemed, where I was once told I was suspended, where I was later promoted, I smile a little to myself. Because the best revenge wasn't watching them fall. It was watching myself rise. Quietly. Completely. Without them.